guess everyone knows me here. It's great seeing everyone this morning. What we're trying to do at the Church of Praxeology, the idea of this organization, is to build a community. We want to build a community around a set of ideas that we think are very important, but unfortunately the larger society we live in does not share our passion for these ideas. They're either disinterested or openly hostile. And so part of the purpose of these services, what we'll be doing is bringing forth these ideas and elaborating on them, exploring them, so that when we leave from here and go out back into the larger world, we have a good idea, increasingly clear idea about what it is that we believe and how that makes us different from everyone else. And one thing that I think makes us very different is our understanding of human nature. We believe that a world without coercive government is possible. We believe that humans can govern themselves without creating a state. What does this say about our understanding of human nature? If you take this idea to most people, they dismiss it out of hand. What does that say about their understanding of human nature? So what I'd like to do is to explain why I think most people have a confused understanding of human nature or an inaccurate understanding. And I'll go through that, and then I'll give a couple of historical examples of where this inaccuracy has caused a lot of damage. And then I'll give some examples of where you still see it today, around you today. So what am I talking about? What is the confusion that most people have about human nature and that we don't share? People who believe in liberty do not agree with. The confusion comes about from people not understanding that there are two distinct types of knowledge. You could call it two separate worlds, really. And let me explain what both of them consist of. The first world is the world of inanimate objects, inanimate forces. It's a world that, let's say two types of knowledge. This type of knowledge consists of laws that we have discovered about the world. They exist independently of the human mind. So this type of knowledge includes your knowledge of all the hard sciences, things like chemistry, physics, biology. These disciplines have laws that have always existed. I think 1 million years ago, the speed of light through a vacuum was the same as it is today. It's the same as it will be 1 million years from now. Same thing with chemistry, same thing with biology. We discover these laws, and we have real power to change them because they're not mediated by mind. They exist separately from us. That's the first type of knowledge, describing one part of the world. The other type of knowledge, describing a completely different world, is knowledge of the things that are products of the human mind, things that have come out of the human mind, things that have resulted from human volition. And so in this category, you have such disciplines as economics, political philosophy, human culture, and traditions, and religious systems, political systems, the historical processes, the working out of historical processes. These are things that are inherent to the human mind. You can't imagine any of these happening 1 million years ago when humans were not here. There was no economics 1 million years ago. There was no historical process. There was no political philosophy. And in 1 million years, if humans are no longer here, there will not be these disciplines. So these are things that are inherent to the human mind. You cannot objectify them. You can't describe economics in a world with no humans, no mind. So you have these two worlds, two types of knowledge. And what has happened throughout history is that people have confused them and tried to treat things that are of the human mind as if they're part of the inanimate world. They tried to objectify these disciplines and treat parts of them as if they're objective laws that are discovered, but they're not discovered because they didn't exist. We created them. They came out of the human mind. So I'll give you two examples historical examples. One comes from economics. Like I said, economics is a product of the human mind. You can't imagine it existing in a world without mind. Economics is a relatively new discipline. It's only a few hundred years old. And when philosophers, proto-economists, first started thinking about the economy, started thinking about commerce, they wanted to find objective laws. They wanted to be economists in the same way physicists are physicists. What's a law we can measure that's repeatable? That's always a rule, that's a hard and fast rule with economics. And one of the big questions in economics is a question of value. Where does value come from? So if I buy this card holder and I pay $10 for it, where did that $10 come from? What is the law? What is the objective law that says this thing is worth $10? And if you imagine this existing independently of the human mind, what's its value? This is what they were struggling with. Now, if you think about it, it's an absurd question because you can't have an inherent value. There is no objective rule that determines value. Value is determined by millions of minds in the marketplace, economizing, budgeting, thinking about whether they want this or not. That's what determines if they're going to pay $10 or not for it. And this card holder, a million years ago, it's absurd to talk about its value, but this is what they tried to do. They wanted to objectify it. And so they came up with this theory called the labor theory of value. And what the labor theory of value says is value comes from the amount of labor that is spent making something. So if I spend 10 hours as a blacksmith making this, that's what imputes value to it. And you can make this as an objective rule. In the same way E equals MC squared is an objective law. Value is the amount of labor hours that go into making something. Again, it's an absurd idea if you think about it. I mean, I could spend thousands of hours making something, but if no one wants it, it doesn't have any value. There is no objective law. I could spend virtually no time making something, but it might be very valuable to people. According to the labor theory of value, if I was a monk in the Middle Ages copying a Bible, it might, let's say it takes a month of hard labor to copy that Bible. And a competing monastery 10 miles away builds a printing press, new technology. In that same month, one monk can now produce 100 Bibles. So according to the labor theory of value, we're both committing 1 month of labor. In one case, he's making 1 Bible. In the second case, the other guy's making 100. The labor theory of value says that they're worth the same. The 100 Bibles is worth the same as 1 because they both have the same amount of labor. You see how this is an absurdity? You can't objectify economics. You can't try to treat it like that, but they did. And so the labor theory of value, despite how ridiculous it sounds to us, was actually taken very seriously hundreds of years ago. Adam Smith's Wealth of Nations, which was published in 1776, contains the labor theory of value. And it's still to this day considered a seminal free market book, and it is to a certain extent, but it has this glaring error about where value comes from. And there's a direct line, actually, between Adam Smith's Wealth of Nations and the Communist Revolution. Because if you think through the implications of the labor theory of value, what it says is any profit that's made from selling this that's not given to me as the laborer is exploitation. If you hire me, if my boss hires me to make card holders, and I spend 10 hours on each of them, and he pays me $100, and then he sells them for $200, let's just say, and I believe in the labor theory of value, I think I should get the 200, because all value comes from labor. And you see this over and over again in the communist and socialist literature in the late 1800s. The pamphlets, the books, the novels, they all repeat this. The labor movement, all repeat this: value comes from labor, and the capitalists are exploiting us. So these ideas matter, and people take them seriously. And the philosophers got it wrong. They mixed these categories of knowledge. And so the natural consequence, if we're being exploited, all value comes from labor, that's what the philosophers told us, then we need to overthrow the capitalist system and usher in this utopia. So, leading to the unbelievable destruction because they confuse these types of knowledge. So that's one example. The other example doesn't deal with economics, but it deals with history, the historical process. Again, history is a product of the human mind. You can't imagine a historical process existing independently of the mind. But philosophers, a couple hundred years ago, 150 years ago, when they were trying to struggle and understand the historical process, they wanted to come up with these simple laws. They wanted to come up with objective laws that explain the historical process. This is just as absurd as the economic example. The unfolding of history is kind of like the unfolding of our own lives. Each of us has personal characteristics, strengths, weaknesses, and so to some extent we're on a trajectory. But to a large extent, it's dependent, the direction our life takes is dependent on the ideas that we have and the choices that we make. See, there's not a hard law. It's mediated by ideas. It can change. You know, if I came to you and said, I've discovered an objective law about where your life is going to be. I can tell you where you're going to be at 40, where you're going to be at 50. You can't change it. You'd be like, that's ridiculous. No one can know that. You know, it's up to the ideas you have, the choices you make. So, in history, unfolding of history is just that times a million. It's millions of minds doing the same thing, acting on ideas, making choices. It's unknown. It's up to us. But that was not a sufficient answer for some philosophers. They wanted to make a rule. They wanted to objectify it. So they came up with, if you had grown up in Stalinist Russia, you would have heard this term. You probably don't know it now, but it's called dialectical materialism. And what's dialectical materialism? Dialectical materialism was the theory that Karl Marx and Friedrich Engels had discovered the iron laws of history. They had discovered laws of things of the products of the human mind that were as absolute as the melting temperature of ice, or the covalent binding force of the hydrogen and oxygen atom. And this is what the party in power took up, this idea that they were taking part of this unfolding law of history. The individual didn't matter. The individual mind didn't matter. Your objections to their regime didn't matter because this was going to come about. And if you think about it, even if there are laws to history, there's no need for a coercive state to bring them about because they're laws. So you don't have to liquidate millions of people. You don't have to imprison these people. You don't have to inflict this cruelty on people because they're laws. So even within their own system, there's an inconsistency. But nonetheless, they used this idea to justify everything they were doing. They said, once we get through this tough time, then we'll bring in this utopia. So those are two historical examples of where there's confusion about understanding that there's this world of the mind, things that come out of the mind, and this world of the inanimate forces need to be treated separately. And when you confuse them, it leads to this misunderstanding of human nature. But this goes on. You still see it all around us today. It's almost like a metaphor for it would be, it's like a virus that's in remission. It could take control again. And to a certain extent, it does take control. To a certain extent, all of us have internalized this confusion. And to the extent that we are telling ourselves the wrong story about our own nature. And by definition, what we're doing is limiting the potential our own lives have. Because we're treating ourselves to a certain extent as if we're objects without choice, without volition. So let me just give you a couple examples of where you see this, but when you start thinking this way, you see it all the time. Have you ever heard this expression, there's only two certainties in life? Death and taxes. This is sort of a truism, people say it. people that don't believe it. I'm not going to say people necessarily believe it, but nonetheless, they say it reflexively. But if you think about those two things, death and taxes, those fit on separate sides of those two types of knowledge. Death is a biological law. We've discovered that. It exists. All living things die. That was millions of years ago. Living things die. That's a law of biology. Taxes is not a law in the same sense. It's not a certainty in the same sense. Thousands of years ago, at some point, somebody came up with the idea of taxes. It did not always exist. And maybe that idea, when he came up with it, and it worked, so they continued, and people started to accept it. But it's an idea. It came out of someone's mind. And other minds have accepted it, but it doesn't have to be, you have a mind, what does your mind say? Why does this primitive guy who came up with this idea of taxes get ascendancy to declare a law for you? That's always going to be, See, these things, products of the human mind, are up for negotiation. We can change them. They're just ideas. They're just conventions that have come and been accepted, but if we have better ideas, we can change them. And another example of where you see this is, have you ever been in a philosophical, political discussion with someone and you get kind of in the weeds and then the person says, well, that's all very interesting, but in the real world, ... Now, what is the real world? I mean, we know that there's a real world of objective forces that we've discovered that we can't change. These are inanimate. They don't have thought. They don't have minds. They're just laws. That's real. But then there's also this world that's the world of the mind. It's not governed by laws in the same sense. So when you're having a philosophical discussion with someone, you are entering the world of the mind. You are trying to change it. It's changeable. That's what you're doing. And so when someone says in the real world, what does that mean? Usually what it means is the person has conceded the ground to you and doesn't want to admit it, or he's just saying, I'm not going to think anymore. And I'm going to let people tell me what I'm going to do. But there is no real world. There are conventions, but they can be changed. And another place you see this confusion in misunderstanding human nature comes about a lot when politicians are explaining to the economy to people. They use metaphors. And the metaphors are dangerous because they are metaphors drawn from the world of inanimate forces, but they try to apply them to the human products of the human mind. And it's dangerous because the metaphors make you think you understand. They give the illusion that you have a conception of what's going on, but you don't. So one of the metaphors is, have you ever heard this expression, prime the pump? The Keynesians use this expression. The Keynesian theory is that when the economy is in recession, you flood more money into the system and prime the pump. It's a good metaphor because it makes you think you understand. And if you don't know what that term means, prime the pump comes from an engine. Like if you're trying to start your lawnmower and it doesn't catch, then you press this little button which floods fuel into the cylinders, then the next time it has a better chance of catching. That's prime the pump. Now the problem with the metaphor is the engine has no mind. There's no consciousness in the pistons that decides to fire. There's no consciousness in the fuel that decides to explode. There's no consciousness in the blades as they spin. The economy is not like that. The economy consists of individuals. We have a consciousness, we have thoughts, we have intentions. We have volition. Yes, it's true there's incentives in the economy, but they're not laws in the same sense. If we have different ideas, we can act differently. And it's very dangerous because the politicians, they think about you, they want you to think about yourself, and they want you to think about other people, that you're just like an atom, responding to stimulus or some sort of amoeba that is, to be manipulated according to what they think is best. And that's not an accurate understanding of our nature. Another metaphor you see is like when they say the economy is like a sick patient, But the economy is not a patient. When you get sick, there are pathogens. They are inanimate. They don't have ideas. They don't have thoughts. They attack your cells, which are also inanimate, don't have thoughts, don't have a mind. That's a biological process. the economy, again, does not work like that. It's individuals who are making decisions, having ideas. So, that's the main point I'm trying to make with all this, again, is just to recognize when somebody tries to cross those lines, they're not delivering an accurate idea of what human nature consists of. And to the extent that you have internalized them, you are telling yourself a story about your own nature and other people's nature that is incorrect. And so when people say humans cannot have liberty, but they don't have a reason why, they just say it is. They don't understand that there is, you can do it if we all come to a consensus. So we're going to try this like voluntary exercise if you guys want, kind of on this point, which is trying to show that there's all the ideas we have are changeable. On the back of the program, we put some quotes about liberty, and again, it's totally voluntary. Maybe no one will do it, but if you the idea is like take that home and just maybe contemplate it, think about it, and then write something down. You can rewrite it in a different way. You can write how it's related to your life. You can write how what it made you think of. If you disagree with it, you can say why, and then bring it to the next service, and then we'll do this anonymously. We're going to just post the quote and the response up on the Facebook page, so people can get a chance to express themselves. Like I said, if you want to, or if you want it not to be anonymous, just put your name on it, and we'll include your name. So that's pretty much all I have, and then there's just a couple announcements. Our next service will be August 24th, and we're going to plan on doing these about once a month for a while. So it's probably going to be here, but if anyone has an idea about where else we could meet, I think eventually when we actually take this out of beta, then we're going to want a larger meeting place, someplace that's near a metro, hopefully near or in DC. Just let us know if you have any ideas. And as Gavin said, we are not really pushing this service yet because we're still working on how to operate this. But if you have a friend who you think might be interested, please let them know. And we're looking for people to give us feedback, especially as we do this initially, ideas for how we can improve it. So just we encourage you to invite them. And then the last thing is, we're having a barbecue in 2 weeks. So the information will be on our Facebook page. Everyone's invited. And then we're also August 10th, Saturday. And then also we're going to go out to dim sum again like we did last week. So love if everyone can come. And that's pretty much what we have. So just give us a couple minutes to put the chairs back in order, and then we'll head over next door to the Chinese restaurant.